Today the session is mainly a review of what we've covered. So what we'll go through is just all the summary slides. At the end of each session, we put a little summary slide in there. And what I wanted to do is just, as part of today's session, is just go through all the summaries just as a refresher on what we've covered. And it's actually the way it's pulled together. This is by chance, not by design. The way this is actually pulled together, it's actually pulled into a really nice module. It's almost like a step-by-step guide on how you actually go about applying lean in a business. So if you're moving into a new business, for example, or you've just been promoted into sort of like a senior manager position, it's a really good sort of like step-by-step guide as how you could actually go about improving productivity in that particular business. So there's not a great deal of new stuff. It's mainly a refresher of what we've already covered. But mainly what I wanted to do as well is just have a chat about the projects and just see how things are going with your projects and your implementation. And I think last session, the session before, we sent out some PowerPoint templates. And what we're really keen as part of the next session in 2 weeks' time is that you do a little case study on the work that you've been doing. It doesn't have to be completed. It can still be pretty much work in progress or what you'd like to do within the business. But if you could come along to the next session with some case studies filled in, that'd be excellent, and that'd really help us with pulling together what is a review of the work and the project implementation you've done. So that's the next session. It's focusing on the project. This is this session, which is just a review of the main learning points and see how you've been getting on. Last time, as a reminder, we talked about 5S, and we talked about 5S activity, this idea of sort, so getting rid of all the clutter, set, a place for everything in its place, shine, sort of practice of spending 5-10 minutes at the end of each day to make sure everything's put back the way it should be, standardise, which is documenting it, and making sure there's a standard way of doing work and doing 5S within the operation. So when people join, they know exactly what's expected of them in terms of where things are kept and where work is carried out. And then the sustain element of it, the 5th S, is all about keeping it going and making sure it's just not a one-off cleaning exercise. It's something that gets embedded into the culture within the organisation. I think I mentioned before that you can't just have 1 or 2 people doing 5S. It's got to be everybody within the business. But obviously that takes time. So by doing things like 5S audits, by making sure people are trained up in 5S, by keep repeating the first 3 S's, the sort, the set and the shine, these are all ways of sustaining the workplace organisation and making sure that the operation is looking at its optimum and therefore working at its optimum productivity levels. And last week we talked about getting you to think about an area within your business, the way you can apply 5S. I mean, normally you won't go across and apply 5S across every single area all at once. Normally what we try to do is pick one area within the business, get it up and running, get it working, then choose another area within the business and just break it down into little sections within the business and then just gradually roll it through, and that way you can involve everybody and you can make sure everybody's trained up, everyone understands the reason why you're doing it, and hopefully everyone can experience the benefits from doing that. So last time we left it, we asked you to just pick an area just to think about where you can apply 5S and then start to think through, or even better, get on to doing some of the 5 S's within your chosen area. Now, this is that presentation I just referred to, these template slides. This is what we used as part of SmartHort 1 to document the case studies, and what we'd like you guys to do to document your projects as part of SmartHort 2. And basically, it's just a set of PowerPoints. They've already been sent out to you. We'll send them out again. It discusses about the project detail. So just a little bit of a brief background to the project itself. What were the kind of problems that you'd identified? So that might be changeover times on a potting machine, errors on plants, the wrong plants being lifted, or wrong fruit being lifted, getting through to the pack house. So whatever the issues were around the process, just pulling out what those issues were. If you get photographs, always looks good, always brings it to life when you're presenting it back. The achievements, so what you did, so whether you did some form of 5S, whether you did process mapping, whether you did an activity sample, videos of the process itself, some picture of the process map, for example. Or else if you did a visual management board or something on 5S, you know, picture of before and after from a 5S perspective. What the benefits were, so how much time was saved effectively. You know, if you've got any quotes from people that were involved in it, some of the quotes that we received from the survey that you kindly participated in last time, there's some really nice quotes came back on that. So possibly you want to put some quotes into the case study. So I think to me it's really important. I've said it a few times during the course of the program itself, that it's not only for the business to feel the benefit, it's going to be down to the individuals to feel the benefit as well. If it makes their life easier, they enjoy it, they're more likely to do it again in the future. So if you can get that double win of a benefit for the business, so the management are obviously interested, and a benefit for the individuals, so the individuals want to work that way, that gives you something that's sustainable. So a little bit about the benefits of the project that you've done, or anticipated benefits if you haven't got quite around to completing the implementation. And then the final slide is just a little bit about the next steps. So what you think the next steps are in terms of implementing your project. So we sent this out, I think it was something like 2-3 weeks ago. We'll send it across to you again. We an accompanied email. The idea being, if you could get that back to us within a week, if you could forward that back to us and send that back to us within a week, then that'd be good. What we can work on that. We can contact you if you need any help filling these slides in. More than happy to set up a one-to-one to talk through what you've done and to capture the projects that you've worked on. And then, as I said, the next session in 2 weeks' time, each of the participating companies, if they could feed back their little mini projects that they've worked on, then it just gives everyone the opportunity to learn from each other as well. And everyone can see how lean has been applied to different types of businesses. Okay. But that's okay. But like I said, we'll follow up with emails and the opportunity for one-to-one sessions. So the main review as part of today, this is just going through each of the modules. And like I say, I'm not going to take you through the full presentation pack again. It must be something like about 300 slides in total. So I've just pulled out the summary slides from each of the presentations. So we started off with what lean is. So the 5 principles of what lean is. So this idea of understanding what the value is that you're trying to deliver to the end users, you know, what activities add value that the customer is willing to pay for, using process mapping as a way of understanding the value stream. So how from when the order comes into the business through to the product going out, what are all the steps involved in that? And as part of that, identifying where the 7 waste plus 1 are, so the waste are within the process. And by eliminating those waste, we can improve the flow of the value. The idea of pull, so delivering to customer just in time. So a little bit like what we talked about there with lifting and dispatch. What you don't want to lifting, going out and lifting all the products and pushing it into dispatch. What you want is, as the space is created in dispatch, as the lorries go out, they pull the work in from the lifting side of the business itself, and that way you're not swamping dispatch. You're ensuring the product's moving its way through just in time, so it's arriving at the docks, ready for loading onto a lorry just in time for when those lorries are ready to ship to the end customer. So that's what we determine by pull. The idea of perfection, or Japanese word for it, kaizen. So constantly changing for the better. Getting everybody involved in the business, looking at doing improvements and eliminating as many of those 7 wastes as possible within the process. And then just a slide on those 7 wastes. So when we were getting you to do your waste walks and your process maps, we were getting you to think about, wherever you've got transported material, wherever you've got too much stock, so either stock of raw materials or a stock of products waiting to be worked on, where you've got people walking up and down, moving around the place. You've got delays, people waiting for equipment, delays waiting for labels, producing more than what's required. So producing more than what the customer requires and requests, and therefore having to dispose of that product because it's not selling, basically. Over processing might be doing too much to the product, so spending too much time inspecting or too much time cleaning the product itself over and above the customer specification would be something we classify as over processing. Defects is where you haven't met the spec, so you haven't met the customer specification for whatever reason, and you've got to do some additional rework onto the product itself. So it might mean that you've got to keep the product longer before it's ready, or you've got to repackage the product if there's problems with the packing itself or the labelling. So that's what we describe as defects. And then the +1, the 7 ways +1, is skills and talent. And that just recognises the fact that if you're employing people to work on the 7 ways, you're not fully getting the benefit out of the individuals within the business and the skills that you're employing. And going back to the conversation we were just having, if you're struggling to recruit people in the first place, one of the ways of overcoming that particular problem is to look at how you can carry out waste reduction or productivity improvements. Therefore, that frees up capacity within the business itself. So another way, basically, of tackling that problem of not having enough resource. And then the final bit of module 1 was all about how you select an area for doing improvements. And normally we pick, if we're going to go into an area, we're going to start off doing lean. Normally we pick areas that have a high labour content. So as we just mentioned, dispatch, packing, or the lifting side of the business itself, because they're always quite labour intensive and therefore have the most opportunities for productivity improvement. Or picking an area that's got a lot of quality issues. So if you're having a lot of quality issues between picking and the pack houses, you're possibly looking at the picking process and looking at why some of the quality issues are arising and what can be done to reduce them down. Where you've got repetitive tasks. So if you've got an area where you've got high repetition of tasks or routines within that area, then again, that's another good place to start. You've got high volumes going through it. Therefore, again, you've got the most chance of getting a larger saving. And also, you think it's relatively easy to go into that area. Because obviously, we're talking here about your first projects. And this is where we give you some guidelines to selecting your first lean project. Obviously, as you get more experienced, you can go and tackle some of the more difficult areas within the business itself. But what we wanted you to do to start off with is really get to grips with these concepts. So we wanted you to pick an area where you thought you had a really good chance of success, just to give you the confidence. And then from that, as your confidence builds, you can tackle more difficult areas within the business. So that was module 1. Module 2 was basically all about process mapping and waste walks, and then what you do with those documents. We took you through a simple project. This was one from a garden centre. It's a really simple process, and we showed you this one because essentially it's something that everybody can relate to. And it was a hot drinks counter, and what they were trying to do was reduce down the queuing time on the hot drinks counter. And we use process mapping as a way of identifying all the different sections within that process. So this is looking at it from a customer's point of view. So the queuing, the placing of an order, the heating of the glass. So all these are all the individual elements involved in building the drink itself. And these are all the times associated. And you can see there the total lead time is 4 minutes and 23 seconds. And of which 38 seconds is value add, and 3 minutes and 45 is non-value add. So, excuse me, we focus in on the non-value add. We look at what we can do to reduce down that amount of non-value add within the process. And we use the technique called waste walks to map out, sorry, string diagrams, to map out the routes as part of that process. How does the individual walk around the counter producing this hot drink, this cappuccino? And then from that, you can start to see straight away there's some big issues whereby the customer, sorry, the employee is walking backwards and forwards, making the drink itself. So which sort of indicates that the layout isn't quite right. And you can use this kind of thing in pack houses and in lifting and picking stages. And you can start to see where there's too much walking, there's too much waste, and possibly the layout isn't optimum to reduce down the amount of movement within the process. And then you can see on the after one, what you can see on this is they've reorganised the hot drinks counter. They've now reduced down the amount of walking. It's moving around in a smooth, consistent flow. So everybody's moving in the same direction, not fighting against each other. And the impact of that was to reduce down the amount of waste within the process. So it took the waste down to 59 seconds. So before, they had 3 minutes and 45 seconds and a total lead time of 4 minutes and 23. With the layout improvements, they brought that down to 59 seconds and 1 minute and 14 seconds. So a very visual way, the idea of process mapping, get everybody involved, a very visual way of illustrating where the issues are within the process itself. Any questions on process mapping? Is everyone okay with that?
Looks okay.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I remember, I think you did some really good process maps from what I remember. You used post-it notes, you had them up on the wall. You know, the good thing about post-it notes is you can rearrange them. If you don't quite get the right sequence, you can rearrange it. And it's a good way of just getting people involved and make it an interactive session where people can contribute to defining what the process is. And then we talked about from your process map, you put it onto a waste walk. So it's just a way, you know, sticking with that cappuccino example from the guidance centre, it's just a way of converting the information you've got on your post-it notes, put it onto a spreadsheet template. So you record down all the different steps. Whether it adds value, it doesn't add value. Normally, something that adds value is where you've got an interaction with a customer or you're converting the product through to the finished product itself. So, for example, putting a care label into the product, putting the products in the final packaging, putting a product label that's on the final packaging. All those kind of things add value, because what you're trying to identify is where you've got non-value add, where you've got people walking backwards and forwards as part of the process. So wherever you can start to see distance on your waste walk, that gives you some indication that there's some movement that can potentially be eliminated. And also what we put onto this particular waste walk, as well as the time of the individual steps, the frequency at which these steps are carried out. So as you can start to see, when you've got some highly repetitive tasks, the accumulative time starts to increase quite dramatically. So even though you might only be saving the odd seconds off each of these individual element times, because of the frequency in which you do them, this soon starts to accumulate and soon starts to add up. So your waste walk just gives you another dimension. It starts to be able to put into the equation the frequency of which you carry out these activities as well. So that's the waste walk. Again, it's just a way of identifying where the issues are. So on this one, what you do is for each of the elements, you just cross which one of the 8 wastes that you've seen, and you can start to see that actually there's a bit of a trend here. There's lots of movement, there's lots of transportation, and therefore that's where we need to focus our effort. So again, it just indicates that the chances are it's a layout issue. And then in the third session, we moved on to talk about prioritisation. So you'll have, hopefully, at this stage, once you've done your process map and you've done your waste walk, you've got lots and lots of problems and wastes that you've identified, which is a good thing. You want to be able to identify lots and lots of things. And that's the reason why we do what we do, the way we do it with process mapping, is because more waste reveals itself. I mean, normally when you look at a process, you get used to seeing the issues, and therefore your mind doesn't really identify them as problems. But using a formal technique like process mapping and waste walks, you really do start to see the waste within the process itself. And we write each of those individual wastes down on a post-it note. And then we take each of those post-it notes and we just get a flip chart. We split the flip chart up into 4 quadrants. And then we've got, along one axis, we've got easy to do, hard to do. And then on the other axis, we've got low benefit, high benefit. And you take each of the post-it notes, the wastes or the ideas that people have got about how to eliminate that waste. And you just simply go, is it easy to fix? Is it hard to fix? Is it low benefit or is it high benefit? And hopefully what you get are lots of post-it notes in these top left-hand quadrants, which are your quick wins. You know, things that you can do relatively quickly that are going to give you a payback. So I always start off with those ones. They're the ones that we always start off with. And then again, as you start to get some quick wins, as you start to build your confidence in terms of doing improvements, then you can start looking at some of these second priority ones, which are what we classify as projects. So they're harder to do, but still high benefit. So they tend to be a little bit more time and effort involved in these. You may also have some things that are easy to do, but are low benefit. But we put them as second priority because sometimes it's nice to involve people and to let people feel like that their ideas have been worked upon, and therefore it encourages them to contribute more ideas in the future. And this fourth category, hard to do, low benefit, chances are you'll never get around to doing these. You realistically, you've only got so much resources. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's difficult enough to get enough resource to do the task, let alone do improvements. So when you do get some time to do improvements, you want to be focusing on these quick wins. And then this is just pulling it all together. So you do your waste walk, you identify your wastes, you put them through a prioritisation matrix, you then work out what is the solutions to those problems that you've identified in the quick wins category. So what ideas you got about how you can actually implement those things. And then you start to fill in your action plans on how to actually carry out these actions that will eliminate the waste. And then you start running your improvement actions or your improvement trials and just checking to make sure they're delivering what it is that you want to deliver, the improvements that you want to deliver. And session 4, we talked about the trials themselves. We use this model called Plan, Do, Check, Act. So your plan is the improvement ideas that you've come up with from your prioritisation matrix. You then implement those ideas, which is you do. The check is you make sure that it improves the process in some way. So either improving productivity or improving the 5S or the workplace organisation within that area, or reducing down quality issues. And then assuming that things have worked the way they should, where you planned it out, the act is all about how do you make this part of the normal way of working. So how do you write it up into your work instructions or your standard operation documents to make sure that it becomes a normal way of working. And if it doesn't work the way you wanted it to work, you go back around the loop again. So you reevaluate your improvement ideas, you carry out your actions on those reevaluated improvement ideas, and you just keep going around the loop until eventually you get the improvements that you're looking for in your chosen metrics of productivity or lead time or reducing quality issues and defects. And the idea being that once you've started to come up with your ideas of how to improve the process, you run some trials to verify these ideas. So you mock up for a week the new layout, for example, that you may have you've come up with. You trial that new layout, You make sure that it improves things. If it doesn't, you go back around the loop and looking at how you can fine tune the layout itself. That's what we described as plan, do, check, act. We used to use whiteboards, Kanban boards for displaying the activities that we wanted to do on improvements. So you may have a big whiteboard split up into 3 columns. These will be all the post-it notes and the things that you wanted to do. So usually this is that first priority, quick wins, easy to do, high benefit. I'll put them up onto a Kanban board, a whiteboard, and then every week we'd move across some of the post-it notes. We used to allocate 4 hours every week for doing improvements. So we'd allocate some resource to doing the improvements. So these were what we were going to do this week. And then as we completed those ideas, they'd go on to the final column, which is the stuff that's been done. And then if there were any issues, any post-it notes that we were really struggling with, and we just couldn't get the resources that we needed to do them, we put these on the blockers section of the whiteboard, and that's where we used to involve the senior managers to get them involved in looking at what we could do to eliminate those blockers. Make sense?
Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant. And this is just as you've got managers walking around the area itself. I often found that with a visual management board like this, they were always asking how things were going with the improvements, and it was really neat just to just take them over to one side and say, right, you can see this is the progress we're making. They get a good feeling because they could see the post-it notes moving from left to right, so they get a good feeling that the improvements were being made. So it give them a level of confidence. And this is similar sort of thing, just express in a different format. You've got your prioritisation matrix. This is that easy to do, high benefit. You move these across onto a plan, do, check, act. So what you've basically got here is you've got your this is the improvements you're going to implement. This is your improvements that you've got in progress. These are the ones that have been implemented, and you're going to check to make sure that they've actually improved things. And then finally, the act is writing them up into your new work instructions or your standard operations. So this is how they just captured all the improvement ideas that they had within the business, and then just a really good way of monitoring to make sure those improvement ideas were progressing. So good way of talking about continual improvement at Kaizen. A really easy way of involving everybody in the business, and the idea being anyone could take a post-it note, anyone can write on the post-it note their idea that they'd had, and they'd stick it into this section here, which is what's called evaluate. And what they used to do then is, once they got quite a few post-it notes in this section, they'd just use the prioritisation matrix to identify, hopefully, quite a few quick wins, and they were the ones that got transferred across into the plan section of the whiteboard. So, and if they didn't work on them, if they decided that actually this idea, we don't think it's going to work, they'd put it into the rejected column, and they'd explain to people, they said, look, we don't think it's going to work. These are the reasons why. We really appreciate the fact you've inputted, but not this time. But please do keep coming forward with more ideas. So it ended up being a bit of there was a reward scheme around this as well, so people would get rewarded for generating ideas. And then last slide, and then we'll have a little bit of a break. So visual management boards, the other thing we used to try and do, this was in a tomato growers, we'd have as part of our check to make sure the improvements were generating the ideas that we wanted them to generate. What we'd simply do is we'd just record up on here, you've got your productivity metrics. So this was the fruit in kilograms picked per person per hour. So we could actually start to see whether the productivity of each of the individuals that were working on this particular project, their productivity was improving. And if it wasn't, then obviously the actions weren't as effective as what we thought they were going to be. So we go back around the loop again of understanding why they weren't being effective, these actions, and what it is that we could do to modify the ideas until eventually we started to see the improvements in the productivity rates of each of the individuals. And it started to get quite competitive. You know, people really started to look at the boards and think about things that they could do to actually increase the productivity of their performance. So it sparked off quite a bit of friendly competitiveness. And again, generating more ideas, people suggesting more ideas, because ultimately they were going to benefit by increasing the rate at which they were working. And in this particular business, they were working on piece rate, so it linked back directly into their wages. Okay. Right, so this is just following on from that. Once you start doing your trials of your lean improvements, normally what we used to do is put in place a weekly meeting just to review, quick 15-minute stand-up meeting. It wasn't anything longer than that. And basically what we do is we just keep a list of any problems that we'd encountered with the new layout, for example, or new ways of working, and we just log down the problems, what it is that we were going to do to resolve that problem, who was going to do it, when they were going to do it by, and then we just used to keep a track of progress on those particular issues. So you can see one that this is the template that we sent out to you guys, and then you can see one that I've printed out, one that I was working on with an automotive company, this particular one. So you could just track through the progress of the ideas, and people could see how their ideas were progressing on implementation. So just a real neat way of just keeping things going, sustaining things, making sure things aren't a one-off, and keep going around that continual improvement cycle. Once you've got things working the way you want it to work, the idea of ACT is to write it up in a standard operating document. And this is very similar to what we were sending out to you guys after each session. So we'd send you a standard operating document on how to do a waste walk, how to do a process map. So it just breaks it down into the key stages of doing the activity. So that once you've got a new way of working, the new improved way of working, what you might want to do is write it up into a standard operation document. So this would be the description of what's involved. The key points would be a summary of all those elements. So once somebody's been trained up, and they can refer back to the key points as a reminder. So this column is normally for new people, so new starters. They'd read through in detail. This is for somebody who's experienced and just wants to have a refresher. And then the right-hand side, you'd have pictures of how to carry out that particular process step. So that removes any language barriers. You know, you've got people that that can pick up on images a lot easier than what they can pick up on text. So making sure that you've got loads of pictures in your standard operation document. So again, people can refer to the document and very quickly pick up what's involved in doing a particular activity. So that's a standard operation document where you're capturing the improvements. And then, as I mentioned a little bit with the 5S, it might well be that you choose one area of the business to carry out the improvements, but once you've proved that those improvements and those ideas are working, you may want then to roll that out across the rest of the business. So you might have tried these ideas in one glass house, one particular field, or in one element of the business like dispatch or lifting. And then you go, right, okay, now let's roll this out across the rest of the business. So the idea of the rollout plan is converting the business from the process from where it currently is. So this would be a current state process map, converting it. The rollout plan would be how to convert it where you implement these ideas across the whole of the business. And this is basically where somebody's drawn out, if they implemented the ideas across the whole business, what would the business look like? And therefore the rollout plan is breaking it down into step by step, how you actually take these ideas from one area and implement them all the way across the rest of the business itself. So that's the rollout plan. And then the templates that we gave to you guys The action plans, you've basically just got detailing down on a spreadsheet the individual steps involved in the action plan and the rollout plan, whether the priority using the prioritisation matrix, or quick win, or a longer term benefit or a longer term project, who is going to do it, when they're going to do it by, when they actually did it, so you can keep a track of how long it's taking you to do some of these implementation. An way of updating people, so just a column, just a way of keeping up people update of what the latest status is of a particular improvement idea. And then we just simply colour in the plan, do, check, act cycle to indicate what stage of implementation the project's at. So these are really good ways of not only capturing the improvement actions, but also a way of communicating out to everybody what the status is and keeping people interested in the improvements and the progress of those particular improvements. And then you've got on the left-hand side, the other way of doing it is that visual management board that we talked about earlier, where you've just simply got the action plan on post-it notes. So if it's not a particularly big lean project, it might well be you just put it up onto a whiteboard and you use post-it notes to track the progress of the project itself. So just another way of making it visual, basically. And that's everything that we covered as part of module 2. So mainly talk about process mapping and waste walks, then what you do with the information that comes from that as a way of then generating improvement trials and improvement actions. The third module was looking at a bit more detailed productivity improvements. So it's just going into a little bit more detail about how you actually go about carrying out productivity improvements within a business. And we used a few techniques, namely the one that we talked about quite a bit was activity samples. And the activity sample is where you're looking at a particular process in a lot of detail and trying to understand what the issues are. So that might be a picking process, for example, where you've got a particular operator stays in one position and is doing lots and lots of fine movements with their hands. So an activity sample is a really good way of analysing that particular process. And from memory, what we did is we've got all the different types of activity. So it could be things like lifting or picking, walking. There'd be a description of all the different types of activity that an individual person would do. And then all you simply do is you take 100 samples. Normally what I do is I take a sample every 10 seconds. I look away for 10 seconds. I count to 10 in my head. I look back. The moment I look back and I observe what that operator is doing, and I just simply use a little tally chart to keep a record or a count of what I see that individual doing. And by doing that 100 times, you start to build up a picture of where they spend the majority of the time. But what you would be quite interested in is where they're losing time. So one example that we gave, we noticed that people were queuing to tip the fruit into weigh scales as part of a picking process. And what you could actually see is the impact of that. And they were losing something like about 15 to 20% of their time, which was identified through an activity sample, actually queuing to get to the weigh scales. So the activity sample pulled out that, and we can actually start to quantify how much time was being lost because of that. So basically, this is just how you go about doing an activity sample. So you pick out which process you're going to focus it in on. Like I said, normally when I'm doing activity samples, it tends to be high volume, very repetitive activities. Otherwise, if you did a process map on those types of activities, you might only end up with about 10 post-it notes because it's so repetitive what they do. They're just basically repeating a very simple process over and over again, so you won't get a true idea of where the issues are. So an activity sample is perfect for doing that. So you identify what process you're going to carry it out on. You complete the activity sample itself. So look away, count to 10, look back. The moment you look back, you record down on a tally chart what you see the individual doing. You repeat that 100 times, and then simply just tally up and count up the tallies that you've got for each of the different categories, and you can, because you've took 100 samples, you can very easily convert that into a percentage of how much time is spent on all the different elements. And then you can start from that, you can start to identify where the waste is and start to pull together your action plan. So it might well be that from your activity sample, a lot of time spent waiting for weigh scales, or a lot of time spent walking, a lot of time spent looking for labels, or looking for brooms or tools and equipment that you need to do the job itself. So very, very quickly you can start to build up a picture of where the lost time is, and then what it is that you can do in order to identify ways of improving that. So that's what we term activity sampling. We talked as part of module 3 how you go about problem solving, and we use a technique called the make, which comes from, it's like a branch of Lean, which is called Six Sigma, very, very closely aligned, which very much focused on problem solving of quality issues. So reducing down the amount of variation within a process. So, for example, if you had a lot, going back to what we were saying earlier, whereby you had a lot of problems found in the pack house, where you've got poor quality fruit being identified getting through to the pack house, this would be a really good way of analysing that particular problem and working out what it is that you can do. So the first stage is define. You define what the problem is. So you've got a yield issue, or you're getting 5% rejects being identified in the pack house from the product that's being lifted from the fields. You then measure the problem. So you measure what type of problems are you seeing, the quality issues. Is it a particular problem that you're seeing? Is it occurring on a particular part of the fruit and the vegetable and the product that's getting through to the pack house? So you start to measure and record down in a bit more detail what the issues are. You then analyze that data. So it might well be that you want to graph the data to see if there's any trends. You might want to record down when you find the problems. Is it related to, say, for example, the weather? So as you start to see changes in the weather, you start to see changes in the quality of the product that's coming through to the pack house. So you may want to analyze the data and start to see if there's any trends around that data itself. And then from that analysis, hopefully what you start to identify are some ideas for how you can actually improve things and how you can actually reduce down the errors themselves. Example, we did some work with a tomato grower, and we were looking at what's called floor fruit. And floor fruit, there was a big increase in the amount of floor fruit that they were having. And this is basically where the fruit drops off the vine itself and drops onto the floor. And as a result of which you can't package the product itself, it's contaminated. And we were trying to understand the reasons why it increased so much. And as part of the measurement, we noticed that there was 2 glasshouses in 2 different parts of the country. And by analysing the differences between the 2 and trying to see why one glasshouse had a high percentage of floor fruit and another glasshouse had a very low percentage of floor fruit, what we'd actually realised is there was a particular vitamin that was being included into the feed in one glasshouse and not the other. And it was down to that vitamin that was actually increasing the lack of that vitamin deficiency was increasing the amount of floor fruit in that particular glasshouse. So by identifying that, by introducing that into the feed routines, and then measuring to see what the impact was on the floor fruit in the future, you can actually start to get a control of that problem. Which is once you've done your improve, the next stage is how do we make sure the problem doesn't reoccur again in the future? So how do we control it? So we made sure that's written up into all the work instructions for all the glasshouses was the inclusion of this particular vitamin. So it was clearly documented down that it needed to be included in, therefore hopefully reducing the risk of this problem occurring again in the future. So it's what we covered as part of that module. It's just a bit more of a structure behind problem solving. The risk is with a lot of problem solving, we jump to solution very, very quickly. And the risk is you solve the wrong problem. or you solve the symptom, you don't solve the root cause of the problem itself. Therefore, by doing this approach, this very structured approach, hopefully it just allows you to really understand what the issue is and make sure that you fix the root cause rather than just the symptom itself. So that's what we mean by make or define, measure, analyse, improve, control. Any questions on that at all?
No.
Brilliant. Thank you, Virginia. Short interval control. What this is about is really just sort of like certainly on packing lines. If you've got packing lines, or where you've got lines that are cleaning the product and labelling the product ready for dispatch, you basically want to make sure that rather than waiting until the end of the shift and the end of the day and then discovering you've got a problem, the idea of short interval controls is you break the day down into segments. So I used to do it every hour. So I used to break down and review the data that was coming off a particular line every hour. And every hour I used to look at how many parts were being processed per hour, what defects were we discovering at the end of the lines, and I used to put visual targets for each of those two metrics. And if for any reason our performance dropped below those targets, or dropped below those trigger points, I used to use that as a way of getting the team leaders together, stopping the line, making sure we reviewed what the issues were, and then restarting back up the lines again once we were happy that we got the process back under control again. So you've got your plan, which is how many plants do you want to get out per hour. You start to work on your plan, and then every hour you check. Or in our instance, we did it every hour. You might choose to do it longer, so you might choose to do it every 2 hours or every half day interval. You check to make sure that you're achieving the productivity and the quality levels that you want to achieve. And if for any reason you're not achieving those quality levels, the act is you stop the line, you carry out some remedial actions rather than just carrying on running the lines and not achieving the productivity and the quality. So it's just a way of building in some controls to make sure that you're rather than waiting until the end of the day and discovering that you've not achieved your targets. It's a way of building in regular reviews during the day itself to make sure that you're increasing your chances of hitting the productivity and the quality metrics. So that's what we call short interval control. I quite often what I'd do is I'd put a visual management board at the end of the lines. So I'd have very clearly up on a whiteboard, what we were trying to get out this hour and what our actual performance was, so everybody on the lines could see how they were performing. So that in itself, I found, was actually quite a really good way of motivating people. People could look at that, they could see they were on target, and that'd motivate people. Or else, if they were falling behind, they could start paying more attention and start looking more for the kind of quality issues that we were discovering on the line itself. So it's a really good way of getting some visual feedback to the people that worked on that line, rather than just coming in heads down, just working until the end of the day. It actually gives us some meaning to the actual day itself. As part of Module 3, we also talked about productivity metrics. And normally what we do is we pick 3 metrics. So we'd have something on quality, which might be related to defects and measuring the amount of defects that you're discovering. Cost, so it might be linked to productivity. So parts, product pick per hour, and give you some metric of how well you're using the labour. And in delivery is your ability to meet the plan. So that might be, these are the products that we've got to get out today, and we've got to get onto the back of the lorry. How are we progressing against that particular plan? So we'd have 3 metrics: quality, cost, and delivery, and we'd use them on a visual display as a way of feeding back to people to make sure that things were progressing the way we wanted it to progress. And if for any reason we weren't achieving one of those 3 metrics, we'd write that up onto a problem resolution board. We'd log it down as an issue, and we'd try to understand what was causing it, and that would feed back into our improvement meetings that we used to have. So once a week, we used to have an improvement meeting where we'd get 15-minute stand-up, we'd get everyone together, we'd look at the performance during the week, we'd look at when we hadn't achieved performance on quality, cost and delivery, we'd try and understand the reasons why, and then we'd plan out actions in order to make sure it didn't occur again in the future and we could correct things. So that's what we mean by this quality, cost and delivery. So quite often what we'll talk about is this balanced scorecard where you've got these three metrics, and that way you're getting the balance right on the performance of the process and the way you're motivating the individuals within that process itself. And then underpinning these, and they're almost taken for granted because you wouldn't have a process, you wouldn't have a business if it wasn't safe. So we used to measure safety, but to be honest, it was always taken for granted that we wouldn't operate the process if it wasn't safe. And then we also started measuring morale, and again, that was almost something that we used to really focus in on to make sure the morale of the line. And where we used to measure morale was on the number of improvement suggestions that we were getting back. So if we knew that we were getting lots of improvements and people really engaged in identifying ways of improving the process, then we had a high level of morale on the line. If those improvements started to drop off, usually indicated there was a morale issue, and we try to understand what the problem was behind that and why we were starting to get that particular morale issue. So it's as you start to get more advanced, this is a bit of a more advanced lean implementation technique. As you start implementing your lean ideas, thinking about visual management boards that you can set up that display this information and is used to feed back to the individuals that work within the area, but also to drive action. So driving action either in terms of improvement activity or driving action whereby remedial controls, remedial actions take place in order to maintain the quality, cost and delivery. And that's what we covered as part of Module 3. And then what we've covered so far on Module 4, we talked about 5S. So first of all, this idea of sort, set, shine, standardise, sustain. So we first of all, we got you to think about doing an audit. So we sent out to you a template, a spreadsheet template, and there's a set of questions on each of the 5 categories of the 5 S's. You can customise. Please feel these are our ones. These are our suggested ones, but feel free to change and modify these and make them relevant to your particular business. The spreadsheets that we sent out were editable. Basically you score yourself 0 to 4. 0 would be 0 compliance, and 4 would be total compliance. And the first question, remember rightly, I can't quite read it on the text, is are all the unnecessary items removed from the area itself? So basically, is there any clutter in the area? And by scoring yourself against each of these particular questions and then adding these scores up, you get an overall score. And we were plotting these on radar charts, and by repeating these audits, we used to do them every month, and by repeating these audits every month, we could trend to see whether the area was getting better or getting worse in terms of the 5S scores. So hopefully as you carried out improvement actions, and on the low scores, we used to record down why we had a low score, and then we convert that into an action with who was going to do it and when they were going to do it by. And by carrying out these improvement actions, hopefully the score started to increase and you started to move out and grow the radar. So the first time you did a radar plot, it'd be a very, very small area. As you improve the 5S, the radar chart should get bigger as your score gets bigger within the audit itself. So that'd be the very, very first thing that you do. And then you'd start to plan in the 5S activity. Once you've got your benchmark for the process, you'd then start to plan in a 5S activity. So as you identified, Virginia, first one is always a sort, which is get rid of the clutter. So create a bit of space within the area. And then once you've created a bit of space, the set is this idea of a place for everything in its place. So using things like shadow boards where you've got all the tools up on display, or marking out gangways, marking out drop zones on the floor for where the various different types of products need to go, or where the tooling needs to go itself. So that's what we describe as a set. The shine, we often talk about a 5 or 10 minute shine at the end of each day. So basically, this is a list of activities that everybody does at the end of each day in order to maintain the 5S and the cleanliness within the area itself. So that might be emptying bins, disposing of any defaults or defect product, restocking up the lines with packing materials or labels or chemicals, making sure all the tools are put back up onto the shadow boards. So it's basically just restoring the area to its optimum. So when you start the next day, everything's there that you need. Standardise all about documenting it. So either standard operations, taking pictures. I used to take quite a bit of pictures, and they became like a visual standard of how I wanted that particular area to look at the end of each day. So then that's what people used to use as a way of just making sure that the 5S shine and the 5 minute shine have been undertaken properly. The sustain is all about keeping it going and making sure it's not just a one-off activity. So things like repeating the audits, so going back and carrying out more and more audits on a monthly basis to make sure the scores are improving and not dropping off. You know, there are ways of sustaining the 5S elements, and I think what people enjoy is they actually enjoy seeing the improvements. And usually 5S activities is very visual. And people like that. You know, people can start to see the difference that it's making within an area itself, and therefore that encourages people to carry out more improvements within the area itself. So it's a really good way. You're not going to generate massive improvements productivity-wise with 5S, but hopefully where you do get some big improvements is the engagement of the individuals within the business and getting them more and more interested in doing lots and lots of little improvements. So it's a good way of getting people involved in the initial stages. So that's the 5S. And then next session, I mentioned about with the idea being what we really want to do is for you guys to feedback what projects you've been working on. And then the next session, we'll get each of you just do a tiny mini presentation. It'll be very, very informal. And we're more than happy to spend some time during the next 2 weeks helping you pull together these little mini presentations so that, you know, everyone got the opportunity to learn from each other and ask questions about how they found things and what problems they had and how they overcome those problems. I think that is the best way of learning. You know, peer-to-peer learning from your other colleagues that are doing similar things in different businesses. It really is the best way of learning about these new techniques. So that's what we want to do as part of next time. And these are the presentation we went through earlier, which we'll send out to you. We'll get these sent out hopefully tomorrow or the day after. We'll send these out and just get you to document down. And if you can get them back to us within a week, so if we say 7 days from now, so middle of next week, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, if you could turn these presentations around and get them back to us, and then what we can do then is we can pull them together into a slide pack. If there's any gaps on the presentations, it gives us opportunity to give you a call and just talk through and just illustrate or expand on some of the areas that we think you know, a little bit more details needed. And also it gives us an opportunity to give you some feedback as well, and just give you a bit of guidance on possibly where you want to take the project next.